Welcome back for another installment of Fellowship of the Rink. With me, as always, later in the show, Joe Smith jumps on for an awesome interview that we banked with Chris Peters, talking wild prospects and previewing the NHL draft later this week. And with me now on screen, usually just behind the scenes, producer Isha. How are we doing? This is weird.
Doing better now that the audio levels sound good. Thanks for the feedback, everybody.
Oh, man. I've got to, of course, tease the annual draft show, which have we been doing this since 2020 now?
This will be the 6th annual draft show.
Very, very weird.
I thought it was
most of them just
4 or 5.
together.
Yeah, when I saw 6, I was like, oh my God. We're like, yeah, crazy. Half a decade in.
And you kind of came into all of this like loosely Wild affiliated. Now you're like extremely Wild affiliated. Do you still dial in as much on NHL draft stuff, or where are we at?
This year with the Wild not having a first round pick, and as a Canucks fan, them having the 15th that's being dangled to, the Wild and other teams, which we'll get into later. I honestly have not really cared my interest level this year has been the lowest it's ever been. And I can't get my hockey news magazine in the States at any gas station. So it's been tough. It's been tough. But like as a SOTA POD producer and someone who's gonna be part of the draft show, like I'm starting to do my homework. I produce enough of Judd's Buds where it's like I should know more, but those are easier to skim through and produce.
That still takes me back to the first one that we had Z jump on before he was a regular on the network. And just every time you'd bring up a player, he's like, what does the hockey news have him ranked? 42? And you're like, 43.
Hey, I should actually go and look back and see if like any of the guys who they were high on, like mid second round or whatever actually panned out, or if they were just like after the first round, just we're just gonna throw names. We're just gonna throw names at the wall and just throw it up there. It was just an easy, accessible draft guide, and I mean that kind of tells the story.
Well, anyone that's new to it or has not seen the draft show in the past, Spoke Z runs the show. Actually, no, we're there to run it. He's the one that's there for all of the entertainment and content, but we definitely have to keep him on the tracks. Otherwise, he would sit there and talk about like the 3rd overall pick, 7 more picks deep, because he's got that much to say.
Well, and the Wild have Wild fans have been very interested in the last 6 drafts, right? Like this one, the last 5 drafts. This one, it's like, I mean, maybe they acquire first, right? Like it's very possible.
We're gonna talk about that in a second, actually. But
yeah, but like until that trade is made, until they acquire it, it's like, well, yeah, the hardcores, which let's be honest, a lot of the hardcores are the fans of the SOTA POD brand, right? Let's be honest, like just casual hockey fans in the state probably just listen to K-Fan and like the more accessible and out there publications and things like that. So I think our audience across like all the shows are very much tuned into like, okay, we don't have a first round pick, or let's just dial in on, the next rounds and see what's available there, which is awesome. But there's so much more of a buzz when you're like in the top 10, in the top 15.
For sure. And yeah, it's going to be interesting this year to see what the turnout is with no Wild pick, at least as of now.
I will say though, we had a huge turnout of just like, I remember there was like New Jersey fans in the chat. Right. There were like some Islanders fans who were just like, we were just going through the watch parties and this one seems fun. So we stuck around. My friend Grave Digger Jones, I remember he gave us like a freaking $30 donation last year. And like his team wasn't even in the top 3.
Yeah. And hey, donations not required, certainly accepted. But anyone that's new to it, right? We got Spoke Z at the helm. We'll have highlights for most of the players queued up for when selections are made. We'll make sure that you're up to date on what's happening, whether it's what we're seeing online or the picks that have been made and whether or not they were smart or dumb moves.
I ask you, Hoppy, what you're Scott on this podcast. What is going to be the official, unofficial beer sponsor of this year? Because I feel like the last couple we've like gone a certain direction. Captain's Patch last year, shout out to 10K, the 10K boys at 10K takes. But what should be, we got Barrel Theory on screen right now. Is is that the way to go? Is Barrel Theory going to be the unofficial or official beer? I don't even want to say supplier, but just drink available on show.
We're definitely cramming before the final this year. Yet to be determined.
Maybe we'll have like maybe we'll have an array. Maybe we'll have a buffet.
I mean, hey, smorgasbord. Who cares? Yeah, tune in. We'll probably start 30 to 60 minutes before the draft starts, and
I got it 30 minutes to
run past the end of it because we're several beverages deep and there's plenty to talk about. But we got the two of us. We got Spoke Z, Brett Marshall jumping on, Mateo doing some of the production work with myself. I probably won't be as present in the actual show. I'll kind of pop in and out because I got to run all of the inner workings, do the Isha duties.
But we'll have more guests announced this week too, as we've been, it's obviously an open invitation to those in like any market who have interest in the draft. And we had a ton of guests both in-house, like sitting in my living room watching, and joining us as well. We had more now are just even coming to mind from like the Columbus market. But did the hockey trail? I don't know if the hockey trail jumped on last year, but anyways, Washington market too. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Good crew. And honestly, anyone that's a regular, or even if you're new, shoot us a message if you want to jump in for 5-10 minutes. Happy to pull people in randomly if they want to jump in and talk shop. But going back to the very first one, most memorable because this jersey right behind me here, we went.
Oh, I thought you said because of Bergevin. I thought you said it was memorable because of Bergevin.
We went bonkers over Marco Rossi because it was very tricky by the Buffalo Sabres to make a weird pick and still have us panic when they said that it was from the Ottawa 67s. Everyone's like, God damn it. And then they say Jack Quinn, and we all were like, wait, what? Oh my God, the guy we all wanted, Marco Rossi. He's there. And now Bill Guerin doesn't want him here anymore, supposedly. But you were talking right before we jumped in here about yet rumor mills continuing to spiral.
Yeah, well, I mean, this wasn't even a rumor. This was confirmed that the Vancouver Canucks offered their 15th overall pick and a center. Now, they didn't say the name of the center, but I was just listening to Sakaris and Price, and they had Jeff Patterson on, who's been on the Vancouver beat forever, as long as I can remember. And he was saying that, like, look, it was probably like a B-level prospect, but that he really believes that this was just, a first go at a trade offer, that the Canucks are willing to go as high as a 15th and Hedl if needed to acquire perhaps Rossi. Now, maybe they would ask for like something, maybe like some other low level prospect or like a late draft pick in return.
Our
to like
third,
to kind of even it out. You know what I mean? Because that is like a second line center and a first coming back for a second line center who does have potential, but there might be like a little bit of a sweetener ask, but that could be what is offered from the Vancouver Canucks. And if not Hedl, then, maybe there's another center or a young player in the system or on the roster that could be moved. Basically, long of the short of it was the Canucks are willing to move the 15th 100% in the trade for Rossi and potentially a roster player. Even if the Wild are interested, they said they'd send Connor Garland too if they want him.
I just, my initial reaction is, that would be incredible. My secondary reaction is, how broken is Hedl if they're willing to make that trade?
That's the thing. The Canucks, as a third line center, they are thrilled because if he does get injured, it's okay. But as the second line center, where they have to lean on him a lot, especially in Pettersson's freaking droughts, which is apparently becoming a thing, they need him, right? And if he's out and Pettersson's on a drought, then it's like there is no center.
I'm still down for the suggestion that came up in the live chat on one of the Judd's Bud streams. Let's just do a little random number generator, and whichever Elias Pettersson gets rolled, Rossi for Pettersson 1-for-1. So it's a 50-50 shot that we get Elias Pettersson the center versus Elias Pettersson the defenseman.
Yeah.
No, I know would take those chances based on what we're hearing about potential returns for Rossi at this point.
I know the Wild aren't necessarily they're more, especially if they get rid of Rossi, they're obviously more in the market for a center replacement. But like, I mean, Yurov's coming in, so like maybe not. But like, do you think Garland in the 15th gets it done, or do you think that the Wild have no interest in Connor Garland? Who, like, let's be honest, he's been relatively healthy. He's missed 2 games in the last 3 years, and he's put up 46 to 50 points every single year. And he's 29.
I have no idea what Bill Guerin thinks about Connor Garland.
He's small. That's the thing. He's small.
He doesn't play it though. At least
no.
Like if Marco Rossi played with some of the vigor that Garland does, maybe Guerin doesn't see him as a 5'9" center. But
I think that's a good deal. It's just like
I don't think it happens
do they need a wing?
Because he wants a center back. That's like been made very clear. I don't think that's realistic. I don't know how you're going to come up with a trade where we don't get worse, but move Rossi for a center who's bigger than Rossi. Like that doesn't compute for me unless you're throwing a bunch of other stuff in, and it's just a weird timing with all the other teams trying to get better.
Well, yeah,
plus
and the Canucks,
fact that if they're going to bring in a winger, I gotta imagine they've got Brock Besser circled.
Yeah. And it's not like the Canucks are only in on Rossi. Apparently they made the same offer to Buffalo as well for your boy.
For my boy.
The young kid who you keep talking about, who you said the Wild should be interested in as well in a Buffalo trade.
Peterka?
Yeah, Peterka.
Oh, sorry. I thought
I was gonna say Peterkin, but I'm like, oh, he's not finished.
Right. Oh, I mean,
but the Canucks made the same for him. So like, it's not like if the Wild want to play hardball, the Canucks, they're like, okay, we have other options. And we have some capital to trade. So if you don't want to do business with us, that's fine. But they're willing to up the ante a little bit more if needed.
Fair enough.
So honestly, exciting stuff from both. For me as a Canucks and Wild fan, if the Canucks get Rossi, hell yeah, I'm pumped.
Same about the Penguins.
yeah. And if apparently Brandon Rust in the Canucks, I know it's not a Canucks show. Or
Brian Rust.
Sorry, yeah, Rutherford wants him too, but that's a whole other can of worms. But and if the Wild acquire a first round pick this year, then sweet, the draft show becomes more interesting. And if they get a roster player, then easy to move on maybe from somebody else, or makes that second line a lot better when Yurov comes in. Yeah, so eyebrows raised, eyes wide open.
Like nothing will happen because that's the most boring outcome.
Yeah.
I hope I'm wrong. What's not boring, because people have lots of opinions. Greg Cronin officially named head coach for the Iowa Wild. People seem really upset about this. I mean, I guess I understand some of the optics around it with like what happened with the Anaheim Ducks. I'm not going to go too deep into this because it does get addressed here by Chris Peters just on the other side, but it sounds like at least some accountability will be put in place. And I think that's very important for this team. There's still a lot obviously to be seen, but all we know is it's not going to be what we saw the last 2 years, which already has me excited.
Yeah. Like at this point, we just need change, right? We just need change.
That's right. But
until I'm not going to be critical.
Right over to Chris Peters. This interview is brought to you by our friends at Waggle Golf. Waggle Golf believes what you wear on the course should reflect your individuality, who you are, where you're from, your hobbies, interests, and passions. All the stuff that makes you, well, you. That's why every design is inspired by the desire to create a piece of apparel that strikes a chord when you see it. That makes you say, wow, that was made for me. Because in a lot of ways, it was. Ready to get your waggle on? Go to getyourwaggleon.com. Throw in promo code SP10 at checkout to take 10% off your entire order. Someone you may already listen to on his podcast Called Up, or his spot appearances on the Athletic Hockey Show, NHL Draft Guru and content manager for Flo Hockey, Chris Peters. Welcome to Fellowship of the Rink.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. Great to be with you. Great to be talking draft on draft week as we finally made it.
Yes, we finally made it. And it's an interesting one, no doubt. We'll get into all of that. We always open with like a lighter question to kind of open things up. For you, I'm going to change it up a little bit and have a very targeted one. I need to know, is it more awkward or fun being the arbitrator on height deficiency between Wheeler and Bronman?
Oh, I love it. I relish it. I think that over time, I have come to understand. I'm definitely in the middle on that one. I'd say that I'd come to understand over time how much it does matter in terms of the probabilities of the player making the NHL. I watch, at Flo Hockey, we have the AHL, and I watch a ton of AHL hockey. More like I always have, but I've watched more this year than I probably ever have. And what you find is all of those guys that were, you were talking, I was like, gosh, I really like this guy. I know he's small, but he's going to make it. They're all there, and have been there for and will be there. And that's kind of there are the breakthrough outlier guys that we see over time that do make the NHL and stick, but they're fewer and farther between. When we get into these arguments with Corey and Scott and whoever else, Corey used to be more like me, where we kind of were like, we still believed in the little guys, and now he doesn't at all. So, so I like to go after him for that, because I was like, there's still got to be some little middle ground there. But you have to be, I think, judicious in the players that you're going to stump for when they are on the smaller side.
Yeah, there's not everyone's going to be Marty St. Louis, and everybody's going to be, anybody like that, or like Theo Fleury or all those guys. Like, there's stories and examples that everyone wants to be those guys, Tyler Johnsons and everybody else, and Yanni Gords. But for every one of those guys are guys that maybe, just all of a sudden we're just too small to make it.
Right. And yeah, and I think there are a lot of guys that have gone. There aren't many guys that are 5'8" or smaller that have gone in the first round, but ones that have gone like earlier in the second round. I think back to like Roco Grimaldi, who has played NHL games, but he's primarily played in the AHL. He was a very early second round pick, and he was 5'6". And I was at the NTDP when he was there too, and I was firm believer that this is a kid that's going to have a chance to make it with his speed and his tenacity and his shot. And he played probably more NHL games than you would expect a player of that size to play. But there are definitely more of him than there are of those outlier players. And finding the thing is like trying to figure out who those outlier players are is really difficult. Like Johnny Gaudreau was a complete outlier. They picked him in the 4th round, and that seemed early when the Flames picked him. And yeah, obviously, we saw what his career was and the incredible things that he did. But finding those players is really hard. And again, he was picked in the 4th round. So it's more likely you're going to find that player later than if you take the swing and take them very early.
Well, you saw our name of our podcast is Fellowship of the Rink, little stick tap to Lord of the Rings fandom in that respect. I wasn't sure if you're a LOR fan or if you have another nerddom or nerd itch that you want to share with us.
I am not. I'm embarrassed to say I have not seen a single one of the Lord of the Rings movies. I have not read the books. I have. It's a lot of time that I don't have. However, definitely was big on Game of Thrones and definitely big on like Star Wars and stuff like that as a kid and even still. But I'd say my biggest nerd thing is probably pro wrestling.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't really watch the modern product a ton. I'll dabble in it. But if you go on like my Facebook algorithm, it's basically late 80s into the Attitude Era of the WWE. And that is like, there's probably more of that than hockey, which just tells you how little I go on Facebook, because if it really knew me, it would be all hockey probably. But yeah, I seem to stop on a lot of things that have Stone Cold Steve Austin or Macho Man Randy Savage, and Facebook keeps feeding it to me, and I'm like, yes, more. I'll take all of it, please.
Oh my God. When you when you look at how you've done it for your whole career, and everybody has their own method to their madness in terms of scouting players, and I know you do a lot of research from watching to talking to different scouts and stuff like that. What's your kind of methodology, or what's your kind of go-to way of like, I know what my eyes see, but this is how I make the bigger picture on a player?
Yeah, so it is shifted a lot over the years, but it always kind of comes back to the same foundation. And my philosophy is to keep it very simple. I think that the foundation of what a player is starts with their hockey sense. You look at their skating, you look at the compete level, and those things. Those are pretty much non-negotiables in terms of what will eventually get a player to the NHL. There are players that are weaker skaters that can make it, but they typically have superior hockey sense. So if you have that kind of balance, you can make it. I think that, when it comes to building a list, it really comes down to a simple, is this player more likely to be an NHL player than that player? And that's basically where it goes. You think about things like position, you think about things like, the way the NHL is going. You have to watch a lot of NHL hockey. I think that's a really important thing that people that do this have to understand, is that you have to know what you're projecting to. I've also found, as I mentioned, watching a lot of AHL hockey, where you see the guys that you remembered as prospects, guys that were picked for a certain reason, and you see why they didn't necessarily make it. And it helps refine your process that way as well. I think you do look into historical comparables. One thing that I've gotten really big on in the latter portion of my career is statistical comparables historically. Like, we look at Anton Frondell this year on a points per game basis. No one has ever scored as high of a points per game basis at his age in Allsvenskan ever. So U18, he's 0.86 points per game. That's better than Willie Nylander. It's better than Elias Pettersson. It's better than Philip Forsberg. Those are the guys that, and David Pasternak, I guess I should say as well. And so when you look at stuff like that, it helps kind of paint the picture of where the player is at this stage of their career. And he's ahead of, at least in terms of production. It's not a one-to-one comparable, but in terms of production, that's one thing that kind of makes you say, okay, well, now I need to dig in a little bit more and figure out why that is the case. And, he did it on a team that was very good. And so those are the things you try to contextualize all of that as best you can. At the end of the day, when I come down to it, I've tried to be like super specific, drill it. But I think if people read my scouting reports, they speak very plainly. They're more generalized. And then when I have conversations like this, you'll probably hear more specifics and more things like that. But my goal with everything I do in terms of what my finished product looks like is to give you the best idea that I have of a class and where I think they are and where these players are and how they could potentially fit. And if you come away with that understanding and maybe what their projection is as well, then I think I've done my job. But yeah, I know there's a lot of, like, one of the things that I've grown a little bit frustrated with about what I do and the way things have gone is there's a lot of jargon out there that doesn't tell me anything. And there are things that a player may do in junior hockey. Like, you'll hear something like, oh, he manipulates well or something like this. And I was like, okay, try that against an NHL defenseman. Do you have the hand skills? Do you have the hockey set? Like there are ways that you can kind of say that a little bit more plainly, but I've seen plenty of guys that manipulate junior hockey players and can't do it at the next level because maybe they don't have the compete level. Maybe they don't have the speed. Those are the things. So I think that's why I try to speak as plainly as I do. And maybe it's not as exciting, but at the end of the day, I stand by what my product says and where I've been.
We're going to parse this up a little bit. I'm going to dive in on some NHL draft stuff. Joe is going to follow with more wild prospect pool stuff.
Sure.
But everyone get over to Flo Hockey. Final rankings are posted there for Chris Peters. We've got the latest mock draft. And actually, by the time this posts on Wednesday, I believe you're going to have an even newer mock draft up. At least that's the goal.
Yeah, Wednesday or Thursday, probably Thursday. So
Okay.
yeah, you might. Yeah, we'll see. It depends on how good the information is by Wednesday.
Yeah. Well, looking at your most recent one as we record, obviously for a little bit, there's been consensus around Schaefer at 1. You got to talk to me here about the debate for San Jose at number 2. What's going on here?
Yeah, so I think there is obviously an apparent consensus that Michael Misa is the number 2 pick or the number 2 ranked player. I have heard enough where that's not necessarily it's not 100% consensus, and it may not be consensus within the Sharks. Typically around this time you start hearing it and you wonder if it's smoke, you wonder if it's real. I heard it enough to feel like there's some validity to it, but essentially the conversation there's a belief among scouts, and the scouts are all trying to do what we're doing with mock drafts. They're trying to figure out who's going to take who and what's going to be. But enough of them were kind of saying, hey, like there is at least some smoke here that San Jose might prefer Frondell. The thing is if that were true, and they did prefer Frondell, and it could be, Misa being the more consensus guy would potentially have more value and say, hey, maybe we could trade back, but if you're considering Frondell, everybody's just going to stand pat. And I think that's another reason why we start hearing this kind of thing, because it's kind of signals to everybody else that it said, we got to decide whether or not we're going to trade up or try to get this player, or if we're just going to roll the dice. I think if the Chicago Blackhawks are sitting there, they're probably feeling like we want Misa, and if we get him, we'll get him. If we don't, then we're fine with taking Frondell. It's fine. So I think that there's at least a possibility. The question that remains is, do the Sharks really feel that way? Do they feel Frondell is going to be the better player? And if they do, they better take him. If they don't, and if they're worried about what the consensus does, and I don't think a lot of general managers really are, and I think they're in a market where you could get away with it, where in a way that I still think Kent Hughes taking Uri Slafkovsky first overall was a major kind of like shock to the system of the fans, and took a lot of guts to do it. I think that there's going to be that they're just ultimately going to make the pick that they feel is right. Now, we'll see what happens over the next couple of days, but I do think that it's at least a consideration now. And the fact that they're at least considering Frondell, I think is interesting. And he might be the better fit in the end, because he looks like he'll be a center. Misa could be a wing, could be a center. I think that teams like Frondell's ability away from the puck a bit better than they do Misa's, even though I don't think that's really a weakness for Misa. So there's that. And then on top of that, the Sharks also have Will Smith, who is in that same debate. Is he a center or is he a wing? Well, what happens if you have no number 2 center? Then now you're in it. Now you're in trouble. So that is part of the discussion that I think is happening within the San Jose scouting room. And I as I tell everybody when I do a mock draft, I've never once had a team say, we're picking this guy, this is the guy we're taking. That would be very dangerous information in my hands, given my network. So that is and I totally understand that.
Yeah, that's fair. And I mean, there's always going to be like comparisons and lines drawn to previous drafts. Like this kind of sounds like the whole Leo Carlson, Adam Fantilli dilemma. We've already heard all the talk has been that Brady Martin is basically this year's Beckett Seneca. The one I need to know though, Chris, is James Hagens this year's Cole Eiserman?
He probably is, and he shouldn't be. I think Cole Eiserman's fall was easy to see coming. James Hagens, to me, is not, because I think that there's either amnesia going on, or we're just so obsessed with size that we're going to overlook the 5'11 Dynamo, 5'10 and a half Dynamo. I guess it's funny. I was talking to a guy at the combine, and he goes, He goes, he's 5'11" if you like him and 5'10" if you don't, because of he checked in at 5'10" and a half at the combine. I love that. And the thing about James Hagens is he is, to me, the most dynamic player in this draft. I think he's more dynamic than Misa. I think he's more dynamic than Martone. He has speed. I think he has the best hockey sense among forwards in this draft. Elite vision. I think that his production at Boston College is definitely a factor in why he's not being viewed as this top prospect, because we saw Macklin Celebrini go in there and point up majorly. We saw Adam Fantilli go in there and point up majorly. The big difference in those scenarios was that BC had two nuclear weapons on their roster already in Ryan Leonard, who was a Hobey Baker finalist, and Gabe Perreault. There weren't enough pucks to go around on that line. And I also think that James Hagens, unfortunately, was often third wheeling on that line, which is not what you want to see from a number one center. I bet you I'm setting the over under in points for James Hagens as a sophomore at 50. He had 35 last year. But I think he's going to be a 50 to 60 point player in college hockey, depending on what Boston College gets around him. There's some talk about some guys from the CHL that they could potentially get that would help replace Leonard and Perreault, but also allow Hagens to still be the featured center on that team. I think, because of the size concerns, that is a big factor. Because there are so many big centers, that is a factor. So in my mock draft, he did fall. He fell all the way to the Sabres. And I was like, if the Sabres are this lucky, they're not. They never have been. But if they are, then that's a great pick for them, even though they've drafted kind of on the smaller side.
I was going to say, they'll still get carved for it.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like if you get that player outside of the top 5, the value is incredible. I mean, I think the Bruins should consider it. I think that the Flyers should consider it, even though they're a little bit on the smaller side in some areas. I just think I think the world of the player. He was third on my list. I very much debated putting him 2. And in the end, I think that, the probability saying what they are, that Misa might be the better of the two long term. I don't think the gap is very big at all.
Fair. Let's get selfish then. Any players you're watching that you think have a decent chance of falling into the second, particularly to pick 52, where the Wild will make their first pick of the draft as it stands today?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the range of what's possible from 20 on is really fluid. I think there's a lot of possibilities in what could be available there at 52, because there is such a lack of consensus. I mean, if you want to go off of my most recent list in terms of the guys that are in that range, Ben Keevan from the Des Moines Buccaneers, very speedy player, heading to Arizona State. Ivan Rabkin at 52 from the Muskegon Lumberjacks, though I would say, based on everything I'm hearing, there's a chance he's not drafted until much later because of how awful his combine went. There's a big right-hand defenseman, Max Senica, who could be a first-round pick, could be a mid-second round pick. Who knows? You really that's the kind of the way you feel. There's I think the goalies, there could be some goalies there. Obviously, I think I still have faith in Jesper Wallstedt. Maybe I'm the guy. But there are goalies in that range, and I think it never hurts to have more in your system. Michael Pradell from the Tri-City Storm, very good goalie with high upside. I think he'll be a player that's available there. Maybe if you want to take a swing and don't care about size, I think Cameron Schmidt could be there. He's a guy that's been projected around the first round. I have him 58th on my list. There's a 6'6" defenseman named Jacob Rombach who played for the Lincoln Stars as well last year. He's another guy. Could he go late first? Could he go mid second? Could he go third? I don't know. Those are the kind of things that we're seeing. I think a 6'6" defenseman, very likely going in the second round, probably earlier in the second round. But those are some of the names that you can at least expect to be around the range that the Wild are picking. There should be good options. It's just, I think I've said this on every show that I've been on. there are a lot of guys there are a lot of guys that are easy to like in this draft and very few that are easy to love. So like, it's just basically that's kind of this whole class. It's not a good year to have a pick outside of 13, really, in terms of getting impact value. But I think every scouting staff, this is where you make your money. In years like this, can you mine a diamond out of this group, and can you find the right guy? There are plenty of players with high upside, and maybe it's this or that keeps them from being a first round pick. There are a lot of big guys. There's a lot of, exciting, enticing talents, but there's either this or that gives them a little bit extra risk and the lower probability. So I think if you're the Minnesota Wild, you've got a chance to still land a prospect that's going to fit well into your system. And take a swing on the upside. There's going to be something there.
All right. 5 quick superlatives to wrap up the NHL draft piece. First one, most likely to have his name pronounced wrong by the team drafting them.
Most likely to have his name pronounced wrong. Oh man. I'm going to say probably Sasha Boumediene. He's got to be up there. Because I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right now.
That's usually the best qualifier. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, he's in the mix.
Most likely to be slept on.
Most likely to be slept on. Man, in terms of like first round talents, guys that I think will be a little bit sleepy. I'd say probably Ben Kindle from the Calgary Hitmen, because he's a 5'10" player. He had 99 points in the WHL this year. I think he's a really heady playmaker. I have him just inside the first round. I think there's a chance he could go in the second. Maybe he'll get picked at the end of the first round, but that's a guy that I think is, because of the size, a little bit lower than maybe he should. And he'll have a chance to make it. I think he's got a decent enough compete level. The skating's fine. But his hockey sense and his skill are very good.
Most likely to be taken too early.
Taken too early. Feels like Brady Martin is heading in that direction. I love Brady Martin. But the thing is to me, he is not a centerpiece. He is a nice to have kind of, could he be a center? Could he be a F1 heat seeking missile as a wing? He's the most physical guy. Great character, great story. Teams loved him. Maybe he'll be a captain one day in the NHL. But I think if he does go within the top 5, which seems like a real possibility, it's too early for me.
Most likely to go top 10 if his height started with.
If his height started with 6. Yeah, there's so few of those guys. I'd say probably Cole Reshny. Really good. Really, like he'll go just outside, but he's about 5'10", 5'11". I have him 15th on my list. But the way he played in the playoffs, the way he played at the under-18 Worlds, the different things that he's just a competitor, and he's also very, very skilled. So I'd say Cole Reshny.
Nice. And last one then, most likely team to shock us in round 1.
Could be the Sharks right away. That's certainly a possibility there. I'm keeping an eye on the Predators. I have no idea what they're going to do. I think there is a lot of potential at 5. Like, to me, it would be an easy pick to take James Hagens and maybe be the most dynamic player you've ever drafted. But I think that there could be one of those teams that takes the chance on Roger McQueen. I think Porter Martone could be in play for them. Brady Martin could be in play for them. So I think that really a lot of people are intrigued by what's going to happen between them and also number 4, Utah, I think is a real wild card too.
And you mentioned the Wild will be able to find some way they could fit in their prospect pool at 52 no matter what. I talked to you a little bit before about Iowa, and you've seen them live, and you've did broadcasts for them or with the team there. Just what's been your sense of the struggles the last couple of years? I know they hired Greg Cronin. We put that story on the Athletic today, veteran experienced coach. What's you think the issues has been in Iowa in terms of you hear about the prospect pool, all the top guys or guys that are maybe not all the top guys are playing there right now, but is it not enough talent playing too many young guys? Is it coaching? Is it what's been the issue in Iowa?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. It just always felt a little disconnected. Every time I watched them, like there are a lot of the same mistakes, a lot of the things that didn't go well. I did see some improvement down the stretch from the team, but it was already too late to try to make the playoffs. And I mean, honestly, not making the playoffs in the AHL is pretty unacceptable. Most teams make it, like the vast majority of teams.
Like 24 of 32 or something like that. I think
you can't and they're in a tough division, but you can't one playoffs, and it's not acceptable really in the end. So what I think, the interesting thing about bringing Greg Cronin in, I do think that that's going to make a more competitive, accountable team. I thought last year they probably got away with a little too much. I think that their veteran players did not bring enough to the table consistently enough to help the younger guys along, because we would see, Hunter Haight had many great moments last year, but didn't necessarily have the consistency, because I just felt like what was around him was constantly kind of going. I think Jesper Wallstedt, the defense was horrid during the beginning of the season. I mean, just awful. And he was obviously hung out to dry a lot and never got into a rhythm the rest of the season, really. So I do think that that's part of it. I think that there's talent issues, there's there's experience issues. They had a very young blue line. But now, you're saying, okay, well, we added David Juracek, unfortunately, missed the last few weeks of the season with injury and all this other stuff. Nothing really ever seemed to finally click. So, I think next year it'll be interesting to kind of see, who ultimately is going to be in Iowa, how they progress. I think, Greg Cronin has a history of making the playoffs in the AHL. And then obviously, he comes with his, reputation of being a bit more of a hard driving coach. They might need that right now. They might need that. And we'll see if it pays off. But I think that, certainly there's going to be a little bit more accountability. And I think that there'll be more of an identity. That's one thing that I think I told you before, Joe. I just never felt like they had an identity as a team. Like they weren't hard to play against. They weren't overly skilled. It's just like, what are they? They have pieces. That's the problem, is that they have pieces. So there should be better results there, I think. And we'll see where it goes. But Crow will be interesting to watch, and how he interacts and brings whatever he brings out of that team, because I mean, I live in Iowa. I'm around that. I want to see the team succeed as well, because it's great for the market. But I mean, I think fans are starting to get a little frustrated in Des Moines that, hey, why aren't we ever in the playoffs?
And you mentioned some guys that were bright spots, and I think Hunter Haight was a guy a lot of staff talked to me, even though I guess the rough part is you shouldn't have your best player be your first year pro, or most consistent forward or most trusted guy being and that's the guy they trusted a lot in different situations as a first year pro. So either other guys weren't stepping up or he actually did elevate in his first year. Is that something you saw from him?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I thought that, he came in with energy immediately and that never waned. He kept it up. I think and I'd be remiss not to also mention what we saw from Liam Ogren when he was in the lineup. He showed, especially late in the season, this is a guy that's ready for a bigger role in Minnesota or close to it. But I think for Haight in particular, he's quick, he's skilled. I think he competes really well. I'm sure it was a frustrating year for him overall, but when he was on, he really drove things for them, and that was really important to see. This is a team that did not score a lot last year, but he was a guy that you could say, okay, well, we can toss him over the boards and we can get some goals. And he did that consistently enough, more consistently than some of the other guys in the team outside of Liam Ogren, who had 19 goals in 41 games, so it's really, those are real bright spots. But I think, when we look at the Iowa Wild and we're going to say, okay, are any of these defensemen going to be able to help the Minnesota Wild in the near future? That's going to be the big question. That's going to be the challenge of Greg Cronin to get those guys to the next level, the spot checks and Lambos. And I think we started to see some of it trending well towards the end of the season, but there's still more to go on for all those guys.
And a guy that they're expecting to make an impact on the Wild this year is Juracek, and he might not spend some time in Iowa. Maybe he will spend, especially as he rehabs coming back from that lacerated spleen end of the season. What was your take from him since the draft to now? I think number 6 overall pick, the Wild made a haul to trade for him. I think a lot really highly of him. And our Aaron Portzline wrote in our Athletic All 32, the worst draft pick that Columbus has made in the last 10 years was David Juracek at number 6. So how quickly things kind of fall. But I guess what do you remember about draft week for him? And then where do you kind of see him? Is it just kind of takes a little while longer for a guy like that with his size and situation, or we?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things that happened with Juracek. For one, I loved him in his draft year. He was my number 1 defenseman that year. I had him over Nemec. I liked him better. I thought, the size, I thought his defending, his ability to get up the ice and make plays, and just seeing him continue to elevate in kind of these big situations that he was put in as a younger player. What we have seen as a pro from him is, unfortunately, I think part of it is, just too much too soon, for one. That was part of it. It didn't really, he expected, I think more it's what I should say is he expected more than he should have gotten at that time. He wanted to be in the NHL. I don't know that he necessarily put all that he could into being the best, AHL defenseman before he could be a legitimate NHL defenseman. And then, Columbus gave it a real try a couple of years ago to get him in. And then when it didn't work out and he had to play more in the AHL, it was frustrating to him. The things that he needs to work on, he definitely has to work on the skating. I think everybody kind of sees that, knows that. It's something that his mobility is going to have to improve. But I just think it's just kind of, he has to reset and kind of get an understanding of where he is at and where he can go. Because I think that when you have a guy that's picked 6th overall, the expectations are so gigantic on that player. Regardless of even when after they're traded, there's still this level of expectation for him. I believe he's an NHL defenseman and can be. I think he's got good handles. I think he can move pucks well enough. I think that he has the hockey sense. He just needs to improve some of those decision-making things. But I think part of it is going to have to be, hey, kind of have to respect the process a little bit here and get yourself to that level. And especially coming off of the injury too, how's that going to impact his summer? How is that going to impact his ability and training? I still believe there is an excellent defenseman in there, a guy that could potentially be a top 4, but it still feels a little bit far away right now.
And he told me this is a big year for him. He knew the summer, he did spend some time in Minnesota and work with the staff, and it's a contract year for him too. Entry level deals up after this year. You got to prove, where am I at? Can I fit in? Can I make an impact? And I don't think you should worry about what people, if they think he's a 3rd pair or a 2nd pair or whatever. I think if he gets to the NHL, he can prove how far he goes. But certainly he's a guy that I think we'll be watching a lot in training camp and seeing where he goes with that. A guy we haven't seen much of this year since training camp ish was Riley Height. And he, as Scott had mentioned other shows, probably would have benefited from going the college route, being able to do the new rules and playing a year for the Gophers or something like that, if that would have been, versus going back and playing junior again, which didn't seem like he had much to prove there. Right. I guess, did you see anything different this year with him or any growth, or he showed he wasn't really necessarily ready last year to make the jump to NHL. Is Hunter Haight ahead of him in that sense, or is he a guy who can come to camp and maybe make an impression?
I mean, I think he definitely needs to go to Iowa. He's definitely going to need time. I would say that Hunter Haight getting that opportunity at the AHL level is absolutely helpful to him. I think had this rule been in place, Height would have been a great candidate to go to the college route and probably been a very effective player there. He, in terms of what we saw this season, much of the same. Not a lot of growth. His production was down a little bit this year. Team wasn't as good. They didn't have a real long run in the playoffs, but he's been an excellent junior player for the last 2 seasons, and so that's not nothing. Now he has this opportunity to take the next step, and I think it's going to be more of a gradual build for him. If he goes in and makes that transition really quickly with Iowa, then there's that case that he can make to maybe be part of the plans later on the season, maybe a call up here and there. But I think he's a prime candidate to really see his game, make that step and see his game raise a level, because it is going to be a lot harder. The transition from the WHL to the AHL is a tough one. I think he's going to, be very capable of that because of the hockey sense that he has, the clear tool. Excuse me. But he's, I think that for him, it's all going to be gradual. He's 20 years old. He's got plenty of time to continue to build. But I don't think that he's a guy that I would expect to be on the NHL roster quickly at this point.
A guy we don't expect to see in Iowa, and not just because he has an opt-out clause, is Daniel Yuroff. And I think there's a lot of mystery and curiosity and excitement among Wild fans of like, he's a media center they can slide in if they trade Rossi, or he's a guy you can put as a middle six center. And I know he moved from wing in the KHL, and he showed he was a really effective player, scorer, won a championship, played hurt. Like, where does he slot in your mind, making the transition from the KHL to the NHL?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I hate the opt-out clause because I think that we've seen this before with a player that refuses to play in the AHL, even though it's a great way to kind of smooth that transition out. I think, it's the nature of doing business with players, and he's obviously a first-round pick, a very important prospect. It's not a relationship you want to fray. So I understand the business side of it. My feeling is that if he is still on the trend line that we've seen over the last 2 years in the KHL, he has an opportunity to be an everyday NHLer right out of the gate. He has the strength, he has the capability. What he doesn't have right now is the experience, and he doesn't, he hasn't played on North American ice since the U18 Worlds, 2 years ago. So, or 2021 was 4 years ago. So there's a lot of unknown about how a player at his age is going to transition. I don't think it's going to be a Kirill Kaprizov situation where he comes in and he's like, oh, this is easy. This is great. I do think he can play. And I don't think they're going to have to worry about the AHL opt-out clause, because I think he'll stick. But I would say that my feeling is that he's probably a middle six guy to start. There's definitely top six potential there. There's definitely even top line potential there if he reaches the top of his projection. He has that power element to him, even though he's not a towering forward. He's strong, and he makes plays. So I'm excited to see him. I think he's a really good player. I think that, the one thing I'd say is, it'd be nice to have that buffer if you could get him, say, hey, we need, if it's not working out, because the same thing happened with the New York Rangers and Vitaly Kravtsov, and this back and forth between the KHL and North America, complete disaster. Didn't help anybody. The player needed to buy in more, didn't, and it didn't work. And so my hope is that, that's not the case with Yurov. I think he's a better player than Kravtsov. I think that he's going to have a better future regardless, but it is one of those things that you do have to be like, okay, well, let's hope it works to the NHL, because we don't really have a great option. Because I'll tell you what, if you go out to, back to Russia, it's kind of hard to call you up, so I mean, that's the other thing. So I would, if I were advising him, I would say if they want to send you down for a little bit, just take it for a little bit. You can handle it.
And to be clear, I'm not saying that he's any indication he's made that he's not going to go to Iowa if he was asked, or I think every indication from what he's been telling the Wild Brass, even Judd Brackett, since the day he was drafted, he wants to play in North America. He wants to play in the NHL. And so
yes, I
think having that out clause is good to have if you're in negotiating power, just in case. But I don't get the sense that he's coming in with that diva vibe, but he's going to I'm staying on the lineup no matter what. But I think, so I don't think he'll be a Russia back and forth thing, but I think that's I made the joke because to have outlaws for 3 years in a row, was just a different way to do it.
It is, yeah, for sure.
One guy who did go to Iowa and come back and play well is Marco Rossi. Last question on my end. Judd Brackett was on our pod last week and said basically Rossi has turned into everything we thought he would be on draft day, pretty much.
Yep.
The player that they had hoped, which I think every draft expert or draft director would, or amateur scout would love to have that happen to you. It'd be a success story. Here we are the week of the draft, and there's a good potential he is moved by this weekend. Like, what do you remember about that Rossi versus Lundell versus Jarvis draft? The Wild pick then, and kind of what to make of what he's turned into at this particular point.
Yeah, I mean, you go back to his draft year and you look at the just monumental production that he put together that year, and it wasn't just that; it was that he was just this bulldog that was just so hungry for the puck and made so many plays. And you wondered about the size and everything else. And what strikes me is less about when he was drafted and that, because I think that I agree with Judd. He did turn into everything. Like, I thought, he scored 120 points in his draft year. I was like, he's not going to be a 90-point player in the NHL. He's probably going to be more what he was last season, 60 to 70-point player. A guy that's going to give you good shifts, a guy that's going to compete and all those things. What strikes me is, his post-draft journey has been more difficult than most players ever could have been, with the COVID situation that he had, the health issues, the heart condition, everything else, and then working his way back and how hard he worked to get there. Those were all the characteristics that we saw in him as a draft prospect. This is a bulldog. This is a guy that will go after it. He's going to compete. He's not going to let any slight against him go without an answer, because that's just how he plays. He had that chip on his shoulder then. And I think when you look back at that year too, we were kind of heading into the brave new world of the post-COVID era. We had no idea what was going to happen. But the fact that he still was a top 10 pick, he did have, a teammate go ahead of him, Jack Quinn. How's that working out, Sabres? Those kind of things. Alexander Holtz went ahead of him. Mm-hmm. I had him ahead of him, but that didn't pan out either. So Cole Perfetti was another guy that I did have against higher than Rossi in that particular draft, and he's starting to round into that player as well. So, but I mean, I think it's always tough. You can kind of compare guys. Obviously, Rossi had a late start because of the COVID situation where he didn't have the development. So if you compare him against Jarvis, I don't think it's particularly fair. If you compare him against some of the other guys that are there, Lundell, it's not particularly fair. Also, Lundell's been on, Stanley Cup champion team, just because they didn't have the same issues that Rossi dealt with. Where he's at now, considering everything, is a borderline miracle of development and his own will. So I think that they're, my hope is that they can find a way to work it out, because I do think that he could be a very valuable player. I don't necessarily know if he's going to be the core piece of a championship team, which I think is probably where you say, what are we paying for? What are we ultimately going to be able to pay for? Is he that valuable, or is he going to be a 60 to 70 point guy, which is super, it's nothing to sneeze at, that can be in our lineup on a day-to-day basis. And can we pay him that way? And that might not be possible. And if that's not possible, then I understand kind of the position the Wild are in.
Final question, brought to you as always by our good friends at Waggle Golf. First, make sure you head over to getyourwaggleon.com. Throw in promo code SP10 to take 10% off your entire order. You're going to give me 3 names here, Chris. I don't care if it's a celebrity, athlete, dead or alive. Which 3 individuals are you adding to round out your dream golf foursome?
Oh, dream golf foursome. Wow. Okay. That's tough. Well, dead or alive?
Sure.
Macho Man Randy Savage. 100%. Oh yeah. He's in. I would say probably Wayne Gretzky. I mean, that's the only time I've ever really been starstruck was being in the same room as Gretzky. I don't tend to get super into that. And I was like, holy, that's Wayne Gretzky. So I'd say we got to throw the great one in there. And then to round it all out, oh man, let's go Marty Scorsese, because I need to make sure that I beat someone. And I have a feeling that at his age now, I could take him. So
That's a good one. I like that.
I love a storyteller too. I love to ask about all the movies and stuff. So that'd be
exactly. Yeah. I mean, Goodfellas is probably one of my favorite all-time movies, and
Departed and stuff.
Departed. Yeah. I mean, I love all that stuff. So yeah. So I definitely be into that. But yeah, Macho Man, the great one, Scorsese. Let's get a variety in there. And but that'd be a lot of fun.
It's a heck of a group. It'd be a lot of fun. So, but thanks so much for doing it. Then a busy week, and good luck with all your mock draft 8.0s, and see which one, how it turns out. And we'll hit you up after the draft sometime and ask you how the Wild did. So, but thank you again for all your time.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, guys. Great to be with you.
All right. Awesome stuff from Chris, as you all expect. Again, go check out his stuff at Flo Hockey. But we actually have some bonus material here. Jesse Marshall made a lengthy appearance on the Judd's Buds live stream this week. Here's a little snippet of that. We're obviously going to talk a ton of NHL draft stuff.
Yeah.
We'll dabble a little bit in Pittsburgh Penguins just for you and me, but got to start with a little bit of Minnesota Wild stuff to indulge the listeners. And one of the cooler breakdowns in a while, you jumping on doing film room study on Matt Boldy.
Yeah.
And he's a guy that's been criticized pretty heavily by fans just for the inconsistencies. But after this postseason, people have at least calmed down a little bit. But just please tell people why they should stop being mean and just accept that he's awesome.
Man, like you know, when it comes to the ability to like create space in the National Hockey League, right? Like that is what, for me, it comes down to for him, is the ability to create time and space for himself and settle into areas and get open in ways that are unique, working against the grain, right? Like that's a big one for him. Backing off, like if the puck's, we're in a cycle situation, right? Like he'll work his way out of the zone upwards above the circles and like zoom back in to find a new lane. You keep at his age, right? Like people work a really long time to master that skill. Like, it's I don't even know that it's teachable. Like I would argue that there's only a certain extent that you can give somebody like the ability to do that, and like to have like a game sense for that, and an ability to like change tempos. So I get that there's warts, right? Like I understand that. And I'm sure that there are things that he does that drive people crazy sometimes. And sure, but like, look, these players don't grow on trees, right? You're not going to waltz out there in the world and find another guy that, when it's just, I mean, for me, you work really hard in development to get to this point, right? And like, if you get too impatient and you are unhappy with the early returns, like you're just going to watch the player go and flourish somewhere else, guys. Like that's all it comes down to. So I don't, I thought, you mentioned it, like I thought he closed out the year really strong. I mean, I think from a refinement perspective, I'd love to get him more talent, like that sees and thinks the game the way that he does, that'll allow him to operate off of those. Like I always thought Matt Boldy was a good conduit. And what I mean by that is like he has the knowledge base to be able to make one-touch transitionary plays that like work the puck out of a jam. Like from a support perspective, it's that pass that comes to him and he just passes it along to somebody else, right? It's just that one little simple lateral movement on the puck. I think if you can get him more guys that work seams like that with him and sort of like understand that like cutting approach to offense that he has and can distribute to him a little bit and give him a little bit of stuff to, operate as a little bit of a trigger man, I think you're going to be in good shape. So that was a fun episode. I thought it was really a good time. And I pushed really hard to do some more Minnesota stuff because I think he has some other good players up there. So maybe next year we'll get into that. But I think the future is bright, man. Like I just think that, again, from a hockey, like the word hockey IQ gets thrown around like so ubiquitously all the time as like this catch-all phrase. But when you watch Matt Boldy play, there's a lane-based understanding to his game and how I need to get open. What do I need to do? Initiating contact to work off of somebody. right? Like to give them the impression he's there, and then to spin and peel and like take 5 steps away to get that second of openness, right? And it's just like little stuff like that. It takes years for people to pick that stuff up, years, and he already has it. So like let the rest of the kinks refine themselves. I'm sure there's things that he does defensively that drive people crazy every once in a while. Like I don't watch enough Minnesota to say that definitively, but I feel like that probably would be the case. And that, like, it is what it is, right? Like you don't ask your dog to meow, right? And I think that's like the big challenge sometimes with players like this is you gotta let them eat, let them shoot, let them do what they do. It's you can create that Phil Kessel-like environment for a guy where he has the freedom to do the things that he wants to do and still have to be responsible in some fashions. Like I think that's the ultimate, Goldilocks porridge of the situation, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, if people in Minnesota have had enough Matt Boldy, send him one down to Pittsburgh. I think we'd be happy to take him off your hands.
Don't you butter me up with Phil Kessel.
That was dirty. That was a dirty plug. That was bringing up Phil Kessel was dirty. That was just.
I know my audience,
Yeah.
Jesse Marshall's the best. Anyone that doesn't already tune in for Judd's Buds, definitely check out this week's episode. But we've got quite the treasure trove of content on the YouTube at the SOTA Pod, where we've got different rankings across different regions and leagues. We've got individual player profiles, lots of fun stuff leading into, again, the draft stream that everyone should be tuning into this Friday. Again, I'm going to say it's going to be 30 to 60 minutes ahead of the start of the draft, but we will have all of that posted to the socials soon enough.
Hoglander in the 15th. Your boy. Jesse Marshall's boy.
Jesse Marshall would be quite
he's a winger too, though.
Envious. Yeah. And also not massive. He's not 6'6", so
and not Connor Garland or Philip Hedl, but I just know Jesse Marshall always loved him, and I was obsessed when he was on Team Sweden in the World Juniors. Dude, he was one of the most noticeable players. I think that was 2017, 18. But anyways, yeah, he was an absolute stud. I remember, and I was just like, oh, this guy's fun to watch, and he's somewhat put it together in the NHL. It's like in the years that Vancouver's been good recently, which is few and far between, he's looked good. In the dark years or the dark seasons, he's not looked good. So he's very much needs some insulation, I think.
Need some insulation to look bigger, or
just to be able to actually produce out there. Needs some favorable matchups, and or not to be buried on the fourth line.
Yeah, that would help. Yeah. Regular Fellowship of the Rink listeners already know, but anyone that maybe just tuned in for the first time because of Chris Peters, definitely look at some of our past episodes recently. Of course, Judd Brackett, a great one.
Great episode.
He's always a great interview, but some good insight into both draft practice and wild prospects. But we've got a lengthy list of interviews, and if you want, you can go to the YouTube channel, again, the SOTA Pod, and just go to our interviews playlist, and it's literally all of the individual interviews without the wraparound stuff for all the fellowship interviews. So feel free to abuse that if you wish. Nothing else coming up this week besides all the draft stuff, right, Isha? Nothing else to promote?
Yeah, nothing else other than in July, Ice Wars coming to Edmonton, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go on real ice and bare knucks. Dude, the Canadians, they won 5-4 against the Americans at Battle of the Borders. I'm just saying.
Anyone that just unsubscribed, I completely understand and respect your decision to do so.
What hockey fan doesn't like hockey fights?
I'm not going to dedicate an entire evening to just sitting and watching only hockey fights from guys that didn't play hockey.
Actually, really 80% of them played hockey.
You told me the other day that it was a lot of guys that have never fought on skates before.
The Americans, unfortunately. The Canadians all played hockey. The Americans, there was 3 or 4.
Nice. Let's watch a bunch of hockey players beat the wheels off of non-hockey players because they don't know how to skate. Sweet.
That was their fault for signing the contract. A lot of them were saying it was the synthetic guys. They're like, oh, the synthetic guys is not like real ice. And you know what? I will give benefit of the doubt. The commissions in Michigan did not allow a bare knucks or real ice for liability reasons. So they're taking it to a Indigenous reserve in Edmonton, just north of Edmonton, where there ain't no commission, there ain't no rules, and they're going to do it on real ice and bare knuckle. It's going to be awesome.
It sounds so incredible. Well, you can get this and more in future weeks of Fellowship of the Rink. Isha will be chiming in from time to time, whether it's Isha and I, Isha and Joe, maybe all three of us at some point. But making the rounds to make sure with some scheduling conflicts, we always have content coming out for you guys, fresh and new every week. But with that, again, happy draft week to all. Happy free agency the week after. And of course, 4th of July, but we'll cover that next week. Here it is. I'm just excited. I don't know. Listening to Z talk about all this stuff on Judd's Buds, it's just fun to watch it come to fruition and unfold. Especially, he is either spot on with his picks. He'll go on like a 12 pick streak of knowing exactly who's going to be picked and why. And then he'll go on another 10 pick streak of just being angry at the world because
he's just like, what were they thinking?
Tune in. We'll see you all there Friday. Until then, stay classy, stay to hockey.